colonization. What does colonization have to do with gender?
So what does gender have to do with colonization? Let's talk about it. So this is something I want to talk a bit about because there's a lot of people who don't understand this. And it's, for me, honestly, one of the bases of my politics because when I was in high school, I did a research paper about this and it was pretty foundational to me. So I felt like I would share what I learned back then. And feel free to correct me if any of this is wrong, but this is what I've researched and known over the years as I've researched gender in this country. So one of the very first things they did when they came to the Americas is connected with Native American tribes that they saw were revering some sort of gender identity that existed outside of the binary. We usually refer to these people as two-spirited, but I guess it is really important to acknowledge that these are not like universal necessarily between all tribes, but there are a lot of tribes that do respect the idea of people who exist outside of binary gender. And one of the very first things that they did when they came here with their Christianity was genocide those people. Now that, of course, was part of the colonization, right? They used their religion to justify why certain people should not exist, right? It's literally the same thing we're seeing right now. People are saying, I don't agree with this. My religion disagrees with this. Therefore, we need to make sure that these people are not around so that they don't conflict with these patriarchal understandings of gender. That's what this is all about. And it's important because colonization in so many ways is really about taking one culture and replacing it with another, right? And what they had to do was use religion in order to do that. So basically what they did was they killed the two-spirited people and they were pressuring Native Americans to assimilate into their white culture, essentially, under the pressure of death, right? And with that came Christianity, and with Christianity came their particular type of patriarchy. It's important to understand that within Christian faith, there is a hierarchy that is supposed to be revered, right? Where men exist above women, and above men, of course, is God, right? And this hierarchy, right, is used as a tool of control, right? It's a way that men control other men, right? Using God as a reference point. It's the way that men control women using God as a reference point, right? And it's a tool of control that oftentimes, coincidentally, just so happens to relate very closely to people being able to make money, because patriarchy is also a tool of capitalism, right? And in this country, you can't really decouple colonization from capitalism. I mean, because so much of what they were doing was quite literally this idea that they deserved to endlessly expand, regardless of whether or not that was good for people or whether or not that was good for the environment. Keep in mind, these people came to the Americas, interacted with Native Americans who had known how to run the land, right? They knew how to run the land. They already knew how to do all of these things, right? And they took some of that stuff, right? They took some of that stuff, but ultimately got rid of a bunch of it because they felt that their way of life was better, right? Their way of life was best, and that the natural order of things is that if you are not a white man, you serve the white man. And one of the ways that people of color develop reverence towards white people is through the spread of religion. Think about missionary trips, right? Think about the people who use their religion and tie it to giving people resources, right? Think of the history of how colonization has happened, right? Where you have these missionaries, right, who visit these areas and establish a presence there that ultimately ends up then being the foundation for further colonization, right? This has happened so many times over. And getting a lot of people in this religion feeling sympathetic towards this religion, and therefore sympathetic towards a type of patriarchy, a type of power structure, and this idea that God may just be imbuing these men who are doing this violence with their will, right? Like, all of this is used as a way to control people. The reason why these people do not like trans people is because in so many ways we embody a very obvious, clear contradiction to the tools that they use to control people. If men can be anything, if women can be anything, if these two categories are not just these two categories, it's a lot harder for you to control people, right? Really huge way that people control men and women is basically saying that there's a standard for being a man, there's a standard for being a woman, and you are not living up to it. You're not masculine, you're not feminine. You have failed if you do not embody this particular thing that, of course, is curated and in so many ways does relate not so much to the nature of men and women, but these ideas that are really just instilled through patriarchy. It puts men in the position where they are always the best, always the most capable, regardless of whether or not they're completely incapable, and women perpetually in a position beneath men, regardless of whether or not they know more or can do more or are more capable, right? And what I hope people recognize, and I think we're starting to really, really see it, is that these tools of control only really thrive because we all buy into it and we all believe it, right? Again, the only way that people are able to, successfully colonize some of these areas in a lot of circumstances is because they've been able to convince a certain amount of people to be sympathetic towards this religion that gives them this idea of the hierarchy, right? Which naturally primes you for reverence, right? For bowing down to a leader like Donald Trump, for example. There's a reason why Donald Trump is so wrapped up in religiosity. And it's also incredibly important for people to understand that what's happening right now with immigration, what we're seeing happening right now with immigration is not new. This whole conversation is a very old conversation that we have been having for a very, very, very long time. There's always been this way that especially people running for president have relied on white people who need to feel as if there's some encroaching threat across the border or from some other part of the world, right? In order to, be afraid and react, right? Right now, a lot of white people are afraid of the white population dipping to a point where white people no longer have population dominance and therefore can't really justify a lot of the premises of white supremacy, right? If white people are not having children, if they are not outbreeding people of color, white nationalists believe that that is white genocide, right? That's how they define white genocide, ignoring the history of genocide that they did to people of color in the Americas, right? Completely ignoring that history and what genocide means in that context. To the white nationalist, the goal is securing a future for the white children, right? Because white is supposed to always be superior. And I hope you guys understand that all of this is about a binary and reinforcing a binary because it reinforces a power structure, right? These sort of things require binaries, black, white, male, female. Anything that challenges that, anything that comes against that or could potentially contradict it, puts it at risk. And the people in power who want to use these things to control people, don't want to do that. And right now, because we've all been in so many ways influenced, to see gender a certain way, people across political spectrums feel a certain way about trans people. And there's a lot of people who understand that they can get people to vote for them if they also attack transgender people. So that's basically how these two things connect. They're all related. All of this is part of the same conversation.